Hello fellow YouTubers, Bear Prepper here. I'm going to talk today about foodborne botulism and canned goods, whether they're home canned or whether they're store-bought, and about food spoilage. As you know, I recently had green beans spoil on me. After examining the jars and the lids, what was noted was that the rim of the jar had a very slight bump, which I had noticed before I ever canned. Wasn't enough that I thought it would cause a problem, but what I didn't notice was that the lids that come with those mainstays are a little thinner. So the combination of the two is what caused the spoilage. So for those of you that have the mainstay jars, if you've not had a problem, great, wonderful, so glad. If you're unsure, just purchase yourself some ball lids. They're rather cheap, and that way you can ensure you're okay. Always check the rims of your jars. If you find a high point, then don't use that jar. Like I said, this was very, very slight raised edge. Thought it would be perfectly fine on my balls. It normally is. So what I've done is I'm changing my mainstay jars to ball lids. The ball lids have a thicker gasket. Now, what I want to talk about was botulism. So let me go ahead and read to you what it says at the CDC. This might be a little boring, but I think it's important that you hear this about what causes botulism and how do you get it and how do you prevent it. So, the majority of reported cases of botulism have traditionally been foodborne in nature. In recent years, around 30 cases per year have been reported. That is a very small amount. For the number of people that can go out to restaurants, buy food in a store, 30 cases a year is very, very small. And you'll find out where most of those 30 cases come from shortly. The type A, B, and F strains of the foodborne botulism produce very heat-resistant spores, which are a major concern in the processing of low-acid foods. Low-acid foods are your fruits and things like that. Tomatoes are not low-acid. Pickles are not low-acid. Meat is low-acid. Things like that. Zucchini, green beans are all low-acid foods. These types digest proteins in foods and produce foul odor that may warn a consumer of spoilage. 9 times out of 10, it will warn you of spoilage. The type B, E, and F of the non-protophilic strains can grow at refrigerated temperatures but produce spores of very low heat resistance. These types cause problems primarily in pasteurized or unheated foods because they are non-prophylactic. No off odor or evidence of spoilage may be produced with toxin development. That is your goat milk, your raw cow's milk, those kind of things. And that's not what I'm talking about here. Those, you have to be very careful. Alright. Type A toxin is more lethal than types B and E. The toxin is a protein which can be inactivated by heating at 180 degrees for 10 minutes. How long do we process our meats? 75 minutes to 90 minutes. And I believe it's 244 or 224 is what the actual temperature gets up to. There is nothing here that we can that's low acid or that is canned in the stores that's low acid that shouldn't be canned for at least 10 minutes. So right there you take away the botulism that can be from the heat resistance one. So toxin A. Okay. The toxin can be absorbed in the bloodstream through the respiratory mucous membranes as well as through the wall of the stomach and intestines. These organisms can't grow if air or free oxygen is present in their microenvironment, the area immediately next to them. So, if air is present they can't grow. Well, we know through the processing, air is not present. So if you don't process them properly, then they can grow. That's why it's important to have your gauge checked once a year to make sure the gauge on your pressure canner is accurate so that you don't get spoilage due to the pressure gauge being off. Although low-acid vegetables and fish have been chief culprits, tomatoes, tomato-based mixtures, and such fruits as figs, apricots, pears, peaches, applesauce, persimmon, and mangoes have also been involved. In some of these cases, inadequate processing permitted the growth of molds, yeast, or bacteria, which in turn raised the pH of the food sufficiently to permit the growth of type C botulism. Okay? So inadequate processing time. Colorado and states in the West have higher per capita rates of foodborne botulism than other parts of the United States. That's where I was talking about the 30 cases a year. Most of those are from California or the higher altitudes of the United States. One contributing factor is that the soil in the western United States, from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, contains a particularly high count of type A, spores, the type of spores that produce the toxin most dangerous to humans. A second factor is the higher altitude. The temperature of boiling water decreases as the altitude increases. Thus, the temperature at which foods are processed is lower. To compensate, the canning pressure for low-acid foods must be increased by 1/2 pound for every 1,000-foot rise in elevation. That's why we'll tell you, if you're above 1,000, add 1 pound of pressure to it. Above 2,000, add 2 pounds of pressure. Okay. Forgetting to make these changes leads to underprocessing and an increased risk of botulism. Back to stating that it's a failure of your processing. It has nothing to do with how long this food has been in this can. Botulism does not matter over how long this food has been in this can. What happens when your food expires is you lose the nutrients and the food gets mushy. The longer it's stored, the mushier it gets. It does not mean that you will get botulism because this can has expired by 3 months. And no, you don't get botulism from a can that's been 6 months old. Okay? So please, be careful with that. Don't throw them away because they're expired unless you want to throw them away because they're expired. These cans will bulge because they are in an oxygen-free environment. And low-acid foods in an oxygen-free environment, if they contain botulism, they will expand. In your canning jars, they will blow the lid off, you will get cloudy product, and you will see bubbles. That's how you know there is botulism. They will actually blow this top off 9 times out of 10. These will actually bulge. Alright, back to what I was reading. Okay, ways to prevent botulism. Clean foods well before cooking and processing. This reduces but does not remove all bacteria. Bacteria are still present in nearly every pint of or unit of food to be cooked or canned. Be sure all home canning methods are up to date with the current research. Process all home canned meats and vegetables with the possible exception of tomatoes in a steam pressure canner at 240 degrees for the time recommended in the current USDA research-based publication, which is the 90 minutes for quarts, 75 minutes for pints of the beef. Each vegetable has its own time. If you use multiple vegetables, you choose the highest vegetable, whatever takes the longest to process, and you process that entire batch with that. If you make a stew with potatoes and carrots and meat, you must process it at the meat recommendations. As long as you do that, your pressure canner is reaching 240 degrees as long as you have your gauge checked once a year. And you are killing the botulism spores. Okay. Now, tomatoes can be done in a water bath canner. You can do them in a pressure canner. There is nothing that says you cannot. But you don't have to have a pressure canner to do tomatoes. You don't have to have a pressure canner to do a lot of jams and jellies and pickles. You don't need a pressure canner. But fruits, you need a pressure canner. Acid foods such as tomatoes and fruits, if properly selected and processed, do not support the growth of botulism and may be canned in boiling water bath if current research instructions are followed. Before using home canned food, critically examine the product and container. A bulging lid or leaking jar are signs of spoilage. When you open the jar, look for other signs of spoilage such as spurting liquid or an off odor or mold. As an added precaution, boil all home canned vegetables and meats without tasting for 10 minutes plus 1 minute per 1,000 feet. Boil home canned spinach and corn for 20 minutes before tasting. If the food looks spoiled, foams, or has an off odor during heating, discard it. So what it's saying, if you're still not sure and you're still afraid, then boil that food, because you're going to heat it up to eat it 9 times out of 10, and because the oxygen hits it, it can cause the botulism to present itself. Dispose of all spoiled food in a place where it will not be eaten by children or animals. Expiration is just a best used by date. That means when you open that can, it hasn't softened, it hasn't lost as much nutrients. There is a certain percentage of nutrients that are acceptable, and that's where they get their best use date. So, you know, if I'm hungry and I've got a can of pears that I find that's, 6 months, a year past the expiration date, well, this one expires in October of 2011. Say this was October 2012. I would eat that. If that can is not bulging, I would eat it. That's my choice. You don't have to. I recommend that you always rotate your canned goods. I rotate home canned goods or canned goods. So if I do a huge batch, as you've seen me do, of hamburgers, say I make 40 jars of hamburger, I'm going to divide that in thirds or fourths. We're going to go fourths just to give you an example. So every year I am going to replace a quarter of those. So 10 of those every year I'm going to can. I'm going to replace and I'm going to pull 10 off. So that's a 4-year cycle to replace my canned goods. If I've got home can or non-home canned goods, I only keep a 3-month supply of home canned goods or non-home canned goods on my shelf. So every year I look at them and I replace them, the ones that need to be replaced. Because I don't need a whole lot of canned goods. But if something were to happen, I would like to have a 3-month supply of store-bought canned goods on hand, so that I don't have to worry about it. All of these usually, or most of these, go out to my property because they are on a longer cycle than these are. You do what you think is best for you. I will reiterate for the last time, and then I'll shut up because I know I'm harping on it. Botulism does not grow in a can just because it's a can. Botulism grows because it was not processed correctly. But there's no way that it's going to last 2 years without presenting itself that it has botulism. There'll be other videos out there that might go into other... I hope this had, and I hope that it clarifies some of the questions I've been getting about canned goods, and especially fruits and juice and botulism. Blessings.